lot of tricks were pulled in a book I read. Only man I know that got up from the dead. A lot of people living by the words that he said. I'm checking out the show with a glassy eye, looking at the sun dancing through the sky. Did he come by UFO? Think he'll ever come again a different way, and maybe he has come and gone while I was away. Too much goodness is a sin today. I'm checking out the show with a glassy eye, looking at the sun dancing through the sky. Did he come? ... Okay, yeah, so he's talking about Blue Beam Jesus, folks.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
Pretty much, but
or,
he like
was Jesus
a
an
believer, basically, and yeah, he was wondering if Jesus was like a sort of UFO messiah. Right?
Yep.
Yeah,
yep,
the ending of that song is also, there is something happening that isn't too clear, just a little different than in previous years. I think that happiness is getting very near. It's interesting because there's sort of a chiasm between these two verses where the first one was, almost while I wasn't paying attention, Jesus came and left, and now, like, we're in hell or something. Like, too much goes into the sin today. Maybe he has come and gone while I was away, But also, then in the end, I think it's like, well, maybe a second coming is imminent. So just a lot of confusion. But yeah, it's a very good song. But you can see this is the most explicit in that album. I think the most explicit dealing with this idea, which fascinated him. Yeah.
Yes. Also, what jumps out at me immediately when he says there is something happening that isn't too clear, just a little different than in previous years. That seems to be a pretty direct reference to Buffalo Springfield's For What It's Worth, which is like kind of the probably the most like iconic lyrics in the song besides the chorus. There's something happening here. Which is like it became kind of one of the unofficial anthems of like the '60s hippie sort of protest movement and stuff. Even though the lyrics like deeper in that song are like ambiguous and weird, like singing songs and they're carrying signs mostly say "Hooray for our side" and like what? Like wait, they're actually pro Vietnam? Like I don't know. It's very I think Stephen Stills did that one, and I don't know. So yeah, I don't know what he's referencing there. It kind of like just a little different than in previous years. Like is he referencing that Laurel Canyon first wave in 1967 when that song came out, and it's there's still something happening that's not too clear. I would agree with that as somebody who's listened to Laurel Canyon. There was something happening there, and what was happening is not too clear
until we can figure out what's going on.
We need to shut down Lookout Mountain Air Force Base
until we can figure out what's going on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that it definitely is a reference and a response to that. When he says, I think maybe it's a broader thing about like the climate of the times, kind of with a messianic pose to it, but messianic speculation around it, but yeah.
The images of man were about to change.
Yeah, the images of man are changing, right? Mm-hmm.
But there's and also like the sonic vibe of the UFO album is something that really jumps out at people, and this album was almost lost because it was released. Okay, so like one of the many things that I think that maybe frustratingly we won't be able to give definitive answers for, but all we could do is point out the kind of anomalous aspects of like the creation of this album. It was released on a very small private label. And I'm trying to remember.
Basically, what happened was while he was living in Malibu, just kind of gigging around, he was a regular at this one place called The Raft in Malibu, which, as I said, now is called the Real Inn Fresh Fish Market and Restaurant. But, there's a lot of, like, rumors and legends around this place itself. Like, even on their own website, they have a little section about the history, which is very odd in general. This is their little passage about the raft from the Real in Malibu website. Somebody once said, history is a consensus hallucination. They were probably referring to the history of the Real Inn. This is a fresh fish market and restaurant. Anyway, while we know that the building has existed in its current location since 1947, something else important happened that year. As evidence in the photograph at right, the rest of the history has been passed down through former employees, mostly bartenders like Ralph O'Hara. Current owner Andy Leonard interviewed O'Hara by phone back in 2001. His first remembered history begins with the restaurant being called Marino's, or the Zoo, back in the 1950s. It was then a Mexican restaurant owned by a gay couple. Enter one 6'3", 430-pound retired wrestler from the East Coast who went by the name Fat Jack McGurk by night and Fat Jack Borfona at his day job. O'Hara described how he heard that McGurk muscled a couple of Marinos and became their partner in the aptly named El Gordos in 1962. When the couple finally cut and ran, Fat Jack changed the name to The Raft in 1964 and hired O'Hara as a bartender. Fat Jack was later killed at Big Rock. In 1967, the restaurant was sold to Jim McDonald and renamed The Raft until it closed in 1977. McDonald then opened the Sandcastle at Paradise Cove. O'Hara had many stories of Hollywood's young guns who frequented the Raft. Lee Marvin in particular, who you mentioned. But this is an interesting part. The Great Fire that everyone cites as the end of the Raft/Reel in August 1978 that burned the building to the ground was actually outside and only damaged a dance floor, a shed, and a bar for a total of $3,000 in damage and a Honda motorcycle worth $500. There was no damage to the building at all. So it's interesting that there was, a mysterious fire that, caused this place to shut down, but it actually didn't damage anything, allegedly, that happened, a little bit after this guy's disappearance. The place where, that's so deeply associated with him, because apparently it was, the crowd of regulars there, which included, Lee Marvin, Harry D. Stanton, all these people, Farrah Fawcett, Majors, Yeah, this one dude, Al Dobbs, who I guess was an actor.
I was just looking into him a little bit. Not a lot of info on him online.
No,
but
he's also very enigmatic. But he really believed in Jim Sullivan, the way that Jim Sullivan believed in UFOs.
Yeah, so he founded something called Monty Records, which was a small private label. It sounds like almost largely to release Jim Sullivan's album.
Exactly.
And by the way, I was just looking at the Real Inn. I've been there. I've eaten fish tacos at the Real Inn. It's oh my god. Yeah, no, it's a very much a spot in It's a very old school celebrated spot in Malibu that is a bar and sells tacos and Mexican food and shit. But I didn't know about that deep history of it, and that Jim Sullivan was in that very place back in the 60s. Very intriguing. But I guess Al Dobbs, who is an actor, but I guess also mostly worked as a cue card holder on TV shows and stuff. He founded this private label, but then the thing that jumped out at a lot of real music heads about this strange album is the personnel that he got to play with him on it, because wouldn't you know, it's our favorite actual collective band of the 1960s, probably the true greatest band of the 60s in a way, the Wrecking Crew. Phil Spector's, ensemble of really, really talented session musicians that played the music on Pet Sounds, the Mamas and the Papas, some of the Byrds' early albums, all over the place. They were kind of everything.
The Stone Ponies, which used to back up Linda Ronstadt, etc.
Yeah, and so it's kind of so Jim Sullivan got some of the best guys, including Earl Palmer on drums, Lyle Ritz on bass, Max Bennett on bass, Don Randy on keyboards, and also the producer who also played on the album. I love that this album was literally produced by James Bond.
Yeah, exactly.
AKA Jimmy Bond, who is a member of the Wrecking Crew, and produced a number of albums. And James Edward Bond Jr. So he was who was a graduate of Juilliard and moved to LA in 1959, and as far as I know, was not an intelligence agent of either the British or the Americans, but still an interesting synchronicity given everything else. He did record Frank Zappa among many others.
Yeah, so this guy Al Dobbs, according to him, he says, I would drive down to Malibu every night, sit at the bar. At the time, he was working as you said, a cue card holder. He was an actor turned cue card holder, basically. So he would drive down to Malibu every night, sit at the bar at the Raft, and get wasted and listen to Jim play. I was working at Laugh-In at the time, and at some point, I realized Bob Ginter was Jim's manager. We all began hanging out together, either at Jim and Barbara's house or at Bob's house. We had these wild, crazy parties. It was controlled madness, okay? Like you said, the label was originally named Monty after Delaney's daughter, Chad Delaney. That was his frat brother, Al Dobbs' frat brother from the University of Texas, who fronted most of the money for the album.
Oh, interesting. Those connections always pay off later in life.
Yeah, then Dobbs said, as I mentioned before, Jim was very curious about things that were happening, period. He was not talking necessarily about flying saucers, but he was a very spiritual guy. We were big fans of Edgar Cayce, Barbara explains. All the time we talked about life on other planets. We'd go from Sherman Oaks up to the beach in Malibu and just sit and watch the water and the stars and wonder what it would be like to be up there. So, yeah, eventually I guess she came to believe that he was up there, like, just, waiting with the ETs.
Yeah, I mean, some people did think that he was actually abducted by aliens, like people that knew him, right?
His disappearance is pretty mysterious. He vanished completely. No one, there was a body found that people thought was him, but it was confirmed not to be him. The last place he was some motel where the bed was never slept in. Like, his car was found with his guitar still in it and all of his unsold records just sitting there. And, everyone said, he would never leave his guitar because, he loved music so much and everything.
His 12-string guitar, yeah.
Right, yeah. So it's pretty mysterious. There's an article in the New York Times that gives a good account of what exactly happened in terms of this. Unfortunately, it's trying to paywall me, but I think I can.
Let me see if I got it. I think I have it up here. Yeah, Jim Sullivan, a rock and roll mystery that remains stubbornly unsolved. This is, I think, from 2019, actually. Yeah, and the first sentence is great. It kind of does ring true. Jim Sullivan was the kind of California character who seemed to have stepped straight out of a Pynchon or DeLillo novel, a 6'2" singer and songwriter known as Sully, with a magnetic personality and a handlebar mustache. His dramatic psych folk songs were spacious, cinematic, and edged with mystic, lonesome brooding. His social circle included actors and Hollywood hangers-on, and he had brushes with fame, including an uncredited part in Easy Rider with his friend Dennis Hopper.
Yeah.
On his 1969 debut album, UFO, he sang of beckoning highways, of aliens, of an Arizona ghost town, of a man who looked so natural in death it was clearly his time to go. 6 years later, the 35-year-old Sullivan disappeared in Santa Rosa, New Mexico. On the front seat of his recovered gray VW Bug were his ID, his beloved 12-string Gill guitar, and a box of his two albums, UFO and the 1972 LP Jim Sullivan. Sullivan, a country blues troubadour with an enigmatic story, has been compared to Nick Drake, Richie Havens, and Graham Parsons. Questions about his vanishing still plague the small town where he was seen last, as well as his family and a small group of loyal enthusiasts. Last month, the record label Light in the Attic reissued a self-titled album, along with a new collection of previous unreleased demos titled If Evening Were Dawn, that deepen Sullivan's eerie, essential strangeness. So yeah, he did disappear. He disappeared in Santa Rosa, New Mexico. I think off of Route 66 actually, and he was pulled over for driving erratically by the cops.
Yeah, driving erratically, but they determined that they were he's drunk, but he turned out not to be. After he vanished, his wife started to investigate it. I guess Barbara Sullivan is now dead, so she doesn't believe to this day that he was abducted by aliens, but she did until her death.
Wow.
So she took typewritten notes, and on March 5th, she got a call from him telling her that he was all right. She had no reason to think otherwise. He'd only left the day before. The conversation continued cryptically. When she pressed for details, he responded, "You wouldn't believe if I told you," she wrote. Basically, there's actually a picture in the article of her typewritten notes. He called her from Santa Rosa, New Mexico. He said he called to let her know he was all right. And since he had just left the day before, I had no reason to think otherwise and was a little startled by his remark. I asked him for his driver's license number for car insurance and asked him where he was. He said Santa Rosa, and I said, "Where is that?" And he said, "New Mexico. I'll probably be leaving here tomorrow." I asked why he was waiting, and he said, "You wouldn't believe it if I told you." I said, "Jim, what's the matter? Is anything wrong?" He said, "Forget it. Just forget I said anything. I'll call you from Nashville." On March 14th, I called the San Diego Police Department to find out the procedure for filing a missing persons report and was told I would have to file it in Los Angeles because that was the last known area he was seen in. On March 17th, Jerry Sullivan called the Santa Rosa police to find out if Jim might be in jail there. He was told that Jim was picked up on March 5th, taken in and given a sobriety test. The test was okay, and he was released. On March 21st, Mrs. Ann Pacheco from the New Mexico State Police called Jerry to tell him that Jim's car was in an impound and had been since March 8th. The car was found 23 miles from the main road near the Giannetti Ranch. Mrs. Giannetti said she saw a man standing by the car and asked him if he needed any help, and he said no. She radioed her neighbor, Mr. Emil Bigelow, who called the state police. The state police had Lee Cordova tow the car in as abandoned. So, eventually, some dude was found. There's an article in the newspaper, possibly Sullivan, but it ended up not being him.
Yeah, they did a DNA test and it wasn't him. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so he did check in. Yeah, he checked into the La Mesa Hotel in Santa Rosa after passing that sobriety test, and they said the bed had never been slept in. I guess he went. Apparently, he went to the store to buy vodka.
Yeah.
It seems. Mm-hmm. And then it just somehow his car ends up 25 miles away with all of his stuff in it. And I guess two of his brothers showed up afterwards when investigators failed to turn him up, and they conducted their own search and with other volunteers, and they basically, they didn't find anything. And then, the article says various theories began to spread involving the Mafia, the police, and extraterrestrials. Barbara Sullivan took solace in the idea that her husband was abducted by aliens. It was easier, perhaps, than some of the alternatives. Quote, my parents weren't addled by any great intake of drugs, but they were very much of their times and believed in reincarnation and astrology, Chris Sullivan said. She was convinced he was up in the stars somewhere, waiting for her. And I guess, they found 10 years ago, the guy at Light in the Attic, Matt Sullivan, no relation, heard a vinyl rip of UFO online on the blog Waxidermy and became, obsessed with it. But I guess, tracking down the original version was basically almost impossible. I think they found one pristine copy because it was re-released on Century City Records.
Because it's really a great album.
It's really good. It's really fucking good. Yeah, it is haunting, and that's when they this guy, the other Sullivan, and his wife Jennifer Moss, Maas, which makes me think of Crying of Lot 49. It's kind of funny, It's kind of a little surreal, like Oedipus Moss.
No relation to Jim Sullivan, the guy who founded Matt
not
Sullivan.
at all.
Yeah. They're not.
Yeah, so they found some random leads, but nothing that really added up. So
he went down there, looked at the public library, all the records in Santa Rosa, but they were able to find nothing. Yeah,
apparently a gas station worker told the police that Jim Sullivan had asked for directions back to California.
Yeah, that's mysterious and weird. Yeah. He never officially checked out from that room.
Yeah, they did a promotion when they released the album in 2010 on Coast to Coast AM, where I guess it was the most successful promotion, and people went crazy. Yeah,
because they just had open lines. People were calling in, just saying all sorts of wacky things about what might have happened.
And Dobbs says, his friend Dobbs says at the end of the article, I think he stumbled into something or someone that was unforgiving. It's kind of poetic to picture him still walking out there somewhere, but something happened.
Yeah, something happened.
Chilling.
Yeah,
very chilling.
Yeah, it's extremely eerie. It's one of those things, it's kind of like a, as we know from David Paulides, people do go missing all the time in mysterious ways, but this is a particularly unique case because of the album. Which, what I think is really intriguing about it is that, again, you could say, he was, depressed, he fantasized about this, he, wanted to die in some way, perhaps, or wanted to move on, but the album does really seem to, foretell or prognosticate what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
lyrics,
I think so. I really do think so. He was, I don't know, he was calling out to something or noticed something. We don't know too much about I think, did we mention yet that his, dad basically worked in the defense industry growing up? He grew up in San Diego.
Yeah, he was one of those people who moved out from Nebraska to California to work in the defense industry, I think during World War II.
Yeah, exactly.
Parents. Yeah. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he grew up in the Linda Vista area of San Diego. He was Irish American. They moved from Nebraska to work in the defense industry. So I don't know. They don't say kind of what defense industry. It doesn't sound like he was, like his dad was some big engineer or something. I guess he, according to his self-written liner notes in his first LP, he, quote, grew up in a government housing project with a bunch of other Okies and Arkies and decided to play music after listening to local blues groups. So, I think, so I think he was more just kind of, that was in the background there in Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, might have been working at a defense plant, his dad, or something like that. And eventually his wife did work at, kind of supported both of them by getting a job as a secretary at Capitol Records.
Right, and she kept trying to show it to people there. Who was it who she was always showing it to? I forget, but I guess
it was some
boss.
Yeah, no. Her boss was named. I'm trying
Jim
to see.
Hewart, I guess.
No, he was a musician who played with.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Nick Bennett, I guess, was the person who they were endlessly trying to pitch, but he constantly turned them down.
Oh, I think it was actually John Rankin was the executive. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was Barbara's boss. So his wife's boss, who she worked for at Capitol, he tried to get the upper executives at the label to notice Sullivan's music, but he said they weren't interested at the time, and I didn't have any great position there. But I believed in Jim. Okay, so maybe the other guy, Bennett, you talked about.
Nick
was
Bennett.
With the hired...
He was like Nicolas Konstantinos Venetoulis, his real name. He was like the point
really?
person. Yeah, he was the point person at Capitol for folk rock music. But
interesting.
When they managed to get a meeting with him, he turned them down. Yeah.
I think somebody said that
Brian Wilson credited Bennett with learning the craft of production. He produced Surf and Safari.
Oh, yeah. Really? Wow. Yeah. Okay, wait. I'm looking for his... I'm Googling him right now. It's Bennett, Bennett.
Yeah, Venetoulis. Nick
Oh,
Bennett.
Venett.
Yeah.
How do you spell it?
Vennet.
Oh, Nick Venett. Wow, Nick Venett. I had no idea. 1936. Yeah, wow. But he was Nicolas Konstantinos. Was he born in America?
I guess he was, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know much about him except for being the folk rock point person at Capitol during that time. I mean,
there's kind of like literally no information about him before
he was born in Baltimore. He began his career at 17 as a writer in New York's famed Brill Building Pop Song Factory. He moved to Los Angeles at 19. And he worked with monologuist Lord Buckley. Then he became a staff producer and talent scout at Capitol. And then he came in contact with the Beach Boys through Murray Wilson, who was managing the band, etc. And the rest is history.
He was really, everybody from Frank Zappa to like Linda Ronstadt, Bobby Darin. Yeah,
Fred Neil.
Yeah, pretty much. Mm-hmm.
But he was not
Ravi Shankar
in this album.
Shankar,
he did not want to produce Jim Sullivan, and I guess I understand. I mean, like, he's not really like. He doesn't really have, like, the same sort of star power, I guess, maybe as the Beach Boys, you know? He's, like, this big dude, like, this big weird dude with a handlebar mustache. He's kind of, like, singing these depressing songs.
Isn't David Crosby also, like, this big
Yeah, but he's part of the band, you know? Crosby, Stills, Nash, like, it's a whole thing. I feel like they have more of an image.
Yeah. I don't know, a Jack Nitschke, that guy. Remember we mentioned him in The Right-Hand Man of Phil Spector. Don McLean, American Pie. You know, he produced that record. Right. He did produce Bernie Leadon when he was in Hearts and Flowers. So slight Eagles connection. So yeah, I mean, they didn't really want to fuck with him. It does make me think that, like, if you brought in Charles Manson in 1969 and you put him with the Wrecking Crew, it probably would have been like a decent record.
Well, yeah, I guess if you put him with the Wrecking Crew, it might have been a good album. But I don't know. I think that there's something to Jim Sullivan's, like, talent. I think that he does have maybe you could say, maybe some would say that about Manson. I've always been very unimpressed with his music. I think we've had this conversation before about whether, like, he was a good musician. But, I mean, I'm looking at, like, a picture of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young from the 70s. I just feel like they have a completely different type of vibe from Jim Sullivan, like you know,
that's probably true.
And
you know, he's also not a Van Cortlandt. He's not a descendant of a patroon, so that also, you know, that's a mark against him, I guess.
From a patroon, yeah. You know, they're young, like they have that kind of Eagles vibe. Like, I don't know, he just seems like weathered. Like, even in the picture for his second self-titled album after UFO, you know, you'd think that you'd try to make this as appealing looking as possible. It was produced by Playboy Records when they were trying to branch out into making music, which is another sus thing in and of itself, like, very odd.
It definitely is.
But yeah, like, it's definitely not the same image as, like, a contemporaneous Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
Yeah, like I'm looking at him in a picture of the early 70s with his family, like when he was probably around like the age I am now, and it reminds me of that like meme that's going around about like the guy from Cheers who looks like 50, but he was supposed to be in his early 30s, like the curly hair guy, you know, and it's like this is what like a 34-year-old looked like in 1987, and it's kind of like what the fuck, like people. I guess if you were hard living,
of UFO, it's like very odd. You know, it's like him like is looking up like with his mouth like gaping open, like, and it's like refracted in like an insect eye type way.
He already looks like 40 in like that, and he's probably in his late 20s when that album came out. It's a very kind of haunting and strange cover. Like he's looking up at the UFO, and he's Gary Sinise in
I mean, if you compare this cover to the cover of like the first Eagles album, it's different. Like it's a different.
It is different, though. Actually, I mean, the first Eagles album is a little bit like it's a little eerie at sunset with like the eagle up there, but still a little more. I mean, definitely like, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Like the vibe absolutely is a lot darker than that, and. Yeah, I guess I don't know. It is weird though, like who gets picked, who doesn't, because this is a pretty great record. They did re-release it on something called Century City Records, I think in the early 70s, but then they remixed it. And I don't know, one of the things that really jumps out is the drum work on the album, which is like very mixed. It's mixed very loudly and like up front. And that was the drummer. I'm forgetting his name right now, but one of the very like prominent Wrecking Crew drummers was really laid down. And then so when they re-released it on Century City, they kind of like toned it down a lot. Yeah, it was Earl Palmer. And also Jimmy Bond, it should be mentioned, Jimmy Bond and Earl Palmer were black, so like he's definitely not like a British spy probably. So I guess when they tried to re-release it, they almost couldn't find the original limited release that his friend Al Dobbs did on Monty. So they got really lucky, but otherwise you would have been kind of like stuck with this one version of it that I guess doesn't have the same haunting impact. So, production matters, especially in like a weird record like this. And, it just has a very specific...
I feel like maybe in a way, like a lot of the songs on UFO have like a similar type of vibe to like Hotel California almost, but I mean Hotel California is a very abstract song lyrically, but I almost feel like, I don't know, it's even harder to pin down on UFO. There's it's even more esoteric. I mean, especially with like the themes of actual like outer space contact or extraterrestrial communication or interdimensional interface. It's even stranger, and it's even more like kind of off-putting, and also he didn't have the cachet that the Eagles had already built up as a platform for that.
Yeah.
If you put this album on, if you put UFO on, the first song is Jerome, which I think is like my favorite song on the album, which is, I feel like it's a very deep song, yes, and it does start off like in a very, even if you listen to his demo of it, it still has a haunting quality, but it starts off with those very ominous kind of strings, which I guess is one of the Wrecking Crew members contributed that.
I think Jimmy Bond did the string
Jimmy
arrangements
Bond himself.
for it.
Yeah, right.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.
And I found a magic man. I bought a pound of magic and I kinda dream and plan where you lay your hand. I found a magic man. Where it's at, Jerome? Where is there I wanna go? Where it's at, Jerome? Set a place out there, just a town down there, if you're driving slow. Where it's at?